Hello, Daphne. Are we?
Hello, Anita.
It's so great to be here with you, and I'm so excited that you are now one of two winners for the Outstanding Book Award for the American Association for Theater and Higher Education. So I'm here to have a few words of conversation with you about your book. Your book is Liner Notes for the Revolution: The Intellectual Life of Black Feminist Sound. And I want you to talk a little bit about what made you write this wonderful, wonderful book.
Mm. Well, first of all, Anita, it's such a pleasure and an honor to be here speaking with you. Your work has made such a big impact on the field, so that's exciting in and of itself. Second of all, it's a deep honor to receive this award from ATHE. I always say that this book has been one that I've been working on for at least 40 years now in my head. I'm right now home in California in the San Francisco Bay Area where I grew up. And in my tweens, I gave myself over fully to popular music culture and particularly to rock and roll. I could say a lot more about that, about the fact that I grew up in a family of with my great migration parents who came from Texas and Arkansas and relocated, fled the South to Berkeley, where my dad was a graduate student. Both my parents HBCU grads, and they had kids that were spaced very far apart. I've been called the menopause baby, and I realize this is being recorded, so so I was the young surprise baby, and it meant that I had the luxury and the great gift of being born into a household with generations of sound all around me. The big band and the bebop of my father and the R&B of the 50s and 60s of my mother, really the 50s of my mom. And then the 60s and 70s, pop and soul, and R&B of my older brother and my sister. And as a result of busing and all of the post-civil rights experiences that we know well and that we're living with the aftermath of, I went to school in an integrated neighborhood and heard all the sounds, and was told, if you're listening to that punk rock music, you probably need to take it somewhere else. So I was going to the record store and reading all of these rock music magazines, especially Rolling Stone. Fell in love with the writing, just this kind of really no holds barred, just deeply confident, slightly arrogant writing about taste. Realized that it was all white dudes who were doing that kind of writing usually about white dudes' music, and decided very early on that I wanted to stake a claim in being able to think about that kind of critical writing from the vantage point of a Black feminist. So I told you this was a long journey, and getting to this point of writing a book about the history of that kind of writing, but also to do some reparative work around all of the musicians we've missed in popular music writing, especially rock music criticism, i.e. marginalized publics, Black women especially, who have contributed to modern music culture in powerful, deeply world-altering ways.
It's really such a comprehensive volume that manages to bring together feminist historiography, speculative and yet deeply archival in the work that you're doing.
Mm.
You call the book Liner Notes for the Revolution, and why is that? Why did you select to focus on liner notes?
Mhm. Well, that title actually came to me um, improvisationally in a moment when I needed a new title for a talk I was doing on Zora Neale Hurston at
Ooh.
St. Louis University many years ago. So I always like to bring it back to Lady Zora, being the inspiration for even thinking about the liner note form, which was a part of the interventionist work that I try to do in the book to make an argument about how her classic radical writing about Black culture, in the 1930s in particular, opened up a way of thinking about Black feminist music writing and really doing Black feminist music writing. So liner notes, for folks who didn't grow up with vinyl, and don't know the history of vinyl in this country, liner notes were the actual essays and textual copy that initially appeared on the sleeves of 33 and 1/3 records mid-century. And so, initially it was label heads. Label heads were writing promotionally about their recordings. Hey, you should really be, picking up this Peggy Lee recording, et cetera, et cetera. But it very quickly turned into a really beautifully experimental and virtuosic critical writing art form, a form of criticism that was largely focused on jazz and classical music. So by the late 50s, the early 60s, you get this kind of writers class in jazz culture, people like Nat Hintoff, Leonard Feather, and others, who were writing really rigorously about the history of the recordings, who was playing on the recordings, and dissecting the whole kind of aesthetics of the recording in question. So I wanted to think about what it would mean to think of a book itself as a kind of liner note form to a history of Black women's musicking across the 20th and 21st centuries, and to do a kind of care work. And that's very much inspired by Black feminist critical thought and critical methodologies, and queer of color critical methodologies as well, to do a kind of care work around all of these artists and musicians who have resided in the margins of popular music cultural history. So that's where the form came from, where the title came from for the book.
That's amazing. I mean, I don't really think you even realize how much of an intervention it makes in approaching to write about both sound studies and scholarship. It's really been an inspiration for me. It's kind of a short interview, so I wanted to know if there's anything else you would like to tell the people at ATHE, knowing that we're a theater-based organization who really honors the work that you're doing and the innovations you're making in sound studies.
Yes, thank you. It means a great deal, as I said, to receive this award, because I've always thought of myself as a cultural critic who worked at the intersections of thinking about sonic cultures, thinking about Black performance cultures, thinking really about literary cultures as being cross-pollinated, forms of expression. And I couldn't have written this book, but without a background in a deep commitment to performance studies theory and theater studies theory and theater history. Really, there's a third part of this book which got lopped off because the book was too long, and it's now the current book I'm writing on a Black feminist revisionist history of Porgy and Bess.
Ooh,
And part of the way that I began thinking about this long history of Black women in relation to music writing was to really pay attention to the ways that Black women were erased from the critical writing about Gershwin and about Porgy and Bess. And so if we think about kind of a backwards way of getting to liner notes, it was through this initial work on Porgy and Bess. And so it feels like full circle to come home and to have this honor, to receive this honor from ATHE. It means everything to me. So thank you so much.
thank you very much for spending time with us today. And I'm going to stop the recording at this point and say thanks.
Thank you, Anita.